Today we're going to be reviewing sexy vampires. Today we're going to be doing a book and a show. I'm hoping this is a new little segment of mine. I was able to read, I listened to Interview with a Vampire by Anne Rice. But then as you guys, if you've watched my book haul video, you saw that I actually got this book. I'd like to someday reread it. I love the yellow pages. I'm so weird about that, but I grew up with older books, and I'll show you guys. So these are my copies of Lord of the Rings that I got from my dad, who had them for a very long time. They're falling apart a little bit, but I'm a book sniffer. Anyways, so you got these yellow pages. They're old. I just love old books. I don't know why. I just love them. Love them so much. So I have this copy of wrong book. My bad. Interview with a Vampire by Anne Rice. Who cares? I make mistakes. We all do. The reason why I started reading these books is because my dad was very into Anne Rice. He loves these books, and I was talking to him about them, and thought I would just pick them up, see what they were like, and we go from there. So I read it, or I listened to it on audio, and really, 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 really loved the book. And so I thought, you know what? Why don't we watch the movie? It's been around for a long time, and compare and contrast. So this is going to be full of spoilers. I don't even care with this. It's so old that if you haven't read it or watched the movie by now, well, go and do those things before you watch this, and then come back and watch it. Do what you got to do. I'm not going to say spoilers again, because eventually I'm going to hit into them. So here we go. So this book is absolutely fun, wonderful. It's also very sexy, you could say. It's just dripping with sensuality. Just even the verbiage and the prose itself is just so sensual, which is, as I was reading it, it was something different that I hadn't really read before. And it's not sexual at all, which, it is, but it isn't. I don't know how to explain it. It's just that it's just beautifully written, I think. So the premise is that this vampire named Louis has been alive since around the late 1700s. He was born in France. They went over to the Americas as he was a little boy. He grew up in Louisiana. And his brother and him had a relationship that was very close, but then at the same time, his brother became very religious and kind of was almost like a prophet of types. And then him and his brother got into a lot of arguments, and eventually things led one thing to another, and his brother falls down the stairs and dies. And Louis, because they had an argument right before that, takes this very hard. His mother pretty much blames him for this death, and he can't hardly go on with his life. Then he meets this man named Lestat, or Lestat. I don't know why I can't even remember how to say it, but I think it's Lestat. Anyways, so he meets this man named Lestat, and he just thinks he's the most wonderful man. He's in this depression, this funk, and Lestat tells him that, he can make his life better. And obviously that's to turn him into a vampire. We have Louis, who has said, pretty much like, yes, I want to be a vampire. So Lestat turns him into a vampire because he gives him that choice. But I don't really think that Louis understood what it all entailed when he made this deal with Lestat. And as he becomes more vampire, he learns that, he has to feed or he'll die. As he does this, he also, the first time he kills a human and feeds in the book, and he hates it. And then Lestat tells him that he could have just like fed off animals. And he's like, why didn't you just tell me this in the first place? That was horrific. And then we go on a little bit further from there. He's lived his life as a vampire a little bit longer, and he's gotten used to it. He always feeds off animals in the book as much as he possibly can. And Lestat's always like chiding him for it and telling him like, why doesn't he just like leave his humanity behind and, just start feeding off humans, things like that. And you can see that they're drifting apart. And so Lestat, to save their relationship, and he's obviously a very lonely man, he notices that Louis is going off on his own, and Louis like feeds on a child, a little girl, but then he leaves and he's not going to change her into a vampire. Eventually they both come back and Lestat changes her to a vampire. This leads to Louis and Lestat pretty much becoming pseudo-dads for their child. And this child's name is Claudia. They change her into a vampire, and she's pretty much going to like stay like 6 years old for the rest of her life. And this becomes a problem eventually. And that's a really big reason why this story works so well, is you have these inner demons within each one of the main characters, Lestat, Louis, Claudia. And you see that they're all on different levels of humanity, where you have Louis, who's the most human. Then you have Claudia, who she is a child at the start of the book, and she begins to grow, but it's only her brain, so she becomes more of an adult. And she was taught by Lestat, who is the least human at the start of the book. And you could kind of argue that Claudia becomes the least human and more vampire-like and less feeling than all three of them, like the other two. So as they go through the story, Claudia learns that, there's differences between Lestat and Louis. And at first, she really enjoys the vampire lifestyle. She goes out with Lestat, things like this. But then she learns to just eventually hate Lestat and enjoy Louis because he really cares for her as like a daughter. And that's what was keeping them together. Eventually, she starts to hate Lestat. She starts to hate Lestat and love Louis, but then she finds out, who made her what she was, and she starts to hate them both at the same time because she will never grow into a woman's body. She'll never experience all of those things. And, there's a lot of resentment in her towards both of them. Okay, so Claudia, she pretty much just wants to kill Lestat, and they try many times, or not many times. So Claudia pretty much just tries to kill Lestat, and they eventually like light him on fire, things like that. It's all craziness. And then they travel to Europe, where they want to find more vampires, just like them, because they want to learn about it. Another aspect of the whole book is that Lestat will never teach them like who they are, like why they are the way they are. He won't teach them the history of vampires, anything. He won't teach them anything. And so it frustrates both Louis and Claudia. This leads them to leave. They go to Europe, and I'm going to skip a big part of the book, which I thought was useless. And I'm sure that there are people out there that thought it was a good part. They just go to like Eastern Europe and they meet like vampires that aren't like them. I'm making this very short. There's nothing for them there. And I think that the book could have done without that part, which is why when we get to the movie part, you'll understand. Anyways, so they go to Paris and they actually meet some vampires like them. They start to learn about these vampires, but really these vampires just like love themselves and they don't care about anything else. And Louis hates this about pretty much all of them. Claudia, she likes it a little bit more for a while, but then eventually she sees through them also. And this is where we meet Armand. Armand is this vampire that Louis at first really, really likes. He wants to learn more about him. He's intrigued by him. This actually reminds me of another book that I'm reading right now, The Picture of Dorian Gray, where Dorian is really intrigued by Lord Henry and things like that. It almost feels like the same type of relationship. So they're in Paris. They're with these vampires. Louis is struck by Armand. There's all these other vampires, including this guy named Santiago, who believes that Louis and Claudia killed their master, which is a thing that vampires should never do. And so he wants them dead. Santiago actually like takes Claudia and puts her in a room, and she dies because of the sun coming up in the morning because she can't get away from it. So then Louis and Armand, they leave, they go together, and they live together for quite some time, spanning, I'm guessing, a considerable amount of years, till the time that Louis kind of just like leaves Armand because of differences, and knowing that they're just not, they're not like the same kind of vampire, and they never will be. And that's kind of like the end of the story for the novel. Also, he tells the interviewer the address at some point of where Lestat still lives, or at least the last known place that Lestat has lived. And at the end of the book, the interviewer is like on his way to like go meet Lestat. So I told you all the story about the novel. There's, some details that I probably didn't get into, but whatever. It's a good overview. And then I watched the movie, and I thought, why not watch the movie? It's it's got Brad Pitt, it's got Tom Cruise, it's got Kirsten Dunst. It just had like a ton of big names, and I thought, it can't be that bad. It had Antonio Banderas, who plays Armand, Tom Cruise plays Lestat, Brad Pitt plays Louis, and Kirsten Dunst plays Claudia. And so I started to watch it. The first 20 minutes of the movie, I just could not get into. It was just so different. The first big difference was not Tom Cruise, but Brad Pitt playing Louis. He talks about how his wife and daughter die at the start of the book, and that's why he's in such a depression. And I kind of get that. It was almost like a throwaway line in the movie, so they didn't even have to spend time on developing his character. He's just depressed. Whereas in the book, there's many pages written about, his family life, his brother, things like that. I can't believe I actually haven't talked about this until now. He was actually like a plantation owner, had slaves and things like that. And so in the movie, or in the book, these slaves, they were more, these slaves were more aware of like demons and spiritual things. So when Louis becomes a vampire and Lestat is there, they like already like suspect him. It talks a lot about it in the book. And in the movie, had I not read the book, they just kind of like skip over a lot of like the development of the slaves and their ability to like see through him, and the fact that he's like a vampire. They don't know that he's a vampire. They think more like he's like a demon and he's a bad spirit, things like that. And they're going to pretty much just kill him because there's like deaths happening on the plantation, things like that in the book. Whereas in the movie, they do that, but like there's hardly any explanation. It's super fast. Like they go through it without like much narration at all. And I was just like, okay, had I not read the book, I would have never known what was going on. Like, I would have gotten it, but I would have been like, there should have been more. And I still think that. But they are living on this plantation, and him and Lestat, and the slaves rise up against them and they have to move out. And that's kind of like in the movie where they go and they find Claudia and they live in an apartment together. And from there, actually, the movie does a really good job of following the story within the book. They raise up Claudia. She is growing, but like obviously just her mind. And Lestat's taking her out for kills, and Louis is like treating her like a daughter. And eventually, she starts hating Lestat and she tries to kill him. And it's just like the book. And they go to Europe. But the actual thing that I liked about the movie more than the book was the fact that they cut out the Eastern European vampires completely in the movie, which I thought was a great way to cut down the movie time. Because that part of the book, like, while it was informative and you learned some things about the characters, Claudia and Louis, it just didn't seem like it was necessary for the book. And then they go to France in the movie, so you go straight from Louisiana to Paris. And they meet the troupe of vampires. Now, in the book and in the movie, the actual vampires are doing like plays and things like that. And regular humans are coming to see these plays at night. And then there are some crazy things that even happen like on stage, but they think it's like all part of the show, which is fine. And this happens in both the movie and the book. I mean, sincerely, the movie does right by the book and plays a lot of the same notes as it's going along. And Santiago, he catches Claudia out and kills her in the movie. Louis and Armand, they go off together. And in the movie, which I actually like better than the book, Louis has like this self-realization that he doesn't really need Armand anymore, and he just leaves. Whereas in the book, it's Armand that leaves Louis after he realizes that Louis has been changed by Claudia's death and he will never be the same again. And I just feel like I definitely liked the movie's Louis better at the end of the book than I liked Louis at the end of or did I say book or movie? Yeah. At the end of the movie, I liked the Louis in the movie better than I liked the Louis in the book. But I liked them both. But I definitely liked movie Louis better. And then at the end of the movie, you see the interviewer like get angry with Louis, just like he does in the book. I didn't really explain that earlier, but he does get angry with Louis. He's like, you should love this eternal life that you have, and you should be grateful for it. And Louis is like, that's not the point of this whole interview. It was to tell you that like eternal life is terrible. Taking human life is terrible. Like this existence is terrible. And he's like, no, like if I had your opportunities, I would go see the world. I would live life to its fullest. I would live forever and I would be happy. And Louis hates that. And they kind of just go away from each other. And they're fairly similar endings, but in the movie, the interviewer is driving away. And I believe it's played by Christian Slater, which is pretty cool, like another big name for that time. And he, all of a sudden, Lestat just kind of like shows up in his car. Like, it's crazy. Like, he's just like, whoop, I'm there. And he's like, I'll give you a choice, which I actually thought was really fun. So for the book, I'm giving it a 4 point, no, we're going to give it, I know that on Goodreads, I gave it a 4, but I would give it 4.5 gnomes out of 5. I really, really love the book. And for the movie, I would give it 4 gnomes out of 5. Like, I thought it was really well done, except for maybe the very start. But I did like the fact that they left out that one portion of the book, which didn't even really need to be there in the book. So I didn't expect my first book in a show to have almost similar ratings. We'll see where it goes from here. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. It's going to be a little bit longer of a video, I can tell. So why don't you guys have fun, keep reading, and have a magical day.